You met them 3 times. Maybe you exchanged a few messages. Maybe they smiled at you differently once. And now, they keep appearing in your head while you work, shower, eat, drive, and try to fall asleep. You replay one conversation as if there were a hidden sentence buried inside it. You check their profile, even though you already know what is there. You imagine conversations that have never happened, and the strange part is that you barely know this person. So how can someone occupy so much mental space when they occupy so little space in your actual life? The first clue is that you may not be thinking only about the person. You may be thinking about the possibility attached to them. And possibility has one advantage that reality does not. It has not disappointed you yet. When you know someone well, reality keeps supplying information. You learn how they behave when they are tired. You hear opinions you disagree with. You notice habits that annoy you. You see how they treat people when there is nothing to gain. But when you barely know someone, there are enormous blank spaces, and your mind has plenty of room to complete the picture. A warm look can become evidence of unusual chemistry. One good conversation can become evidence that they understand you. A delayed reply can become a mystery. A casual compliment can survive in your memory for 3 days. The person gave you a few pieces. Your imagination may be building the rest of the puzzle. That creates a very particular loop. Something reminds you of them. You wonder what they meant. You mentally replay the interaction. You imagine a possible future interaction. For a moment, the possibility feels vivid and rewarding. Then you remember that you still do not know what they actually think. The uncertainty returns, so your mind goes back to the evidence again. The message, the smile, the eye contact, the story they watched, the joke they remembered, the 5-minute conversation that somehow now has a full investigation attached to it. This is where uncertainty becomes important. In 2011, psychologists Aaron Whitchurch, Timothy Wilson, and Daniel Gilbert ran an experiment involving college women who viewed Facebook profiles of men they believed had already evaluated their profiles. Some participants were told the men liked them a lot. Others were told the men liked them an average amount. A third group was left uncertain about whether the men liked them a lot or only an average amount. The uncertain participants reported thinking about the men the most. They also reported the greatest attraction. That does not mean uncertainty automatically makes anyone fall in love. The study was limited to a particular experimental situation and a particular group of participants. But it demonstrates something surprisingly relevant. Not knowing can sometimes keep a person mentally active. And the more mentally active they remain, the more material your mind has to keep returning to. So ask yourself a strange question. When this person appears in your thoughts, are you enjoying something that actually happened? Or are you trying to solve something that still feels unfinished? Those two experiences can feel almost identical. Imagine someone you like sending you a message that says, "I had fun tonight." That message contains information, but it also contains several unanswered questions. How much fun? Was that friendly? Was that romantic? Will they message tomorrow? Should you answer immediately? Did the period at the end mean anything? Now imagine they simply said, "I like you romantically, and I want to see you again on Friday." There is much less to investigate. The second message may actually be better news. But the first message gives your mind more work. And sometimes mental work gets mistaken for emotional depth. You think about them constantly, so they must be important. But another possibility exists. They may feel important partly because your brain keeps being asked to resolve them. There is another layer to this. Early intense romantic attraction is not simply a quiet opinion that somebody is nice. It can recruit systems involved in motivation, attention, and reward. In a 2005 brain imaging study, Arthur Aaron, Helen Fisher, and their colleagues studied people who described themselves as intensely in love. When participants looked at photographs of the person they loved, researchers observed activity in brain regions associated with reward and motivation. That does not mean having a crush is the same thing as having an addiction. And it certainly does not mean a brain scan can tell you whether someone is right for you. What it does help explain is why attraction can feel less like a conclusion and more like a pursuit. Your attention keeps pointing toward one particular person. Tiny signals connected to them can suddenly feel unusually important. A notification from 20 other people may be ordinary. A notification from them can change your entire mood before you even open it. And when the signal is unpredictable, the waiting itself can become part of the experience. Will they text? Will they notice you? Will they sit beside you again? Will they like the post? Will you run into them tomorrow? Nothing has happened yet, but your mind is already living around the possibility that something might. This is also why knowing less about someone does not always reduce fascination. Sometimes it protects fascination. Reality has not had enough opportunities to correct the fantasy. Suppose you know 5 things about someone. They are funny. They like the same music. They were kind to a waiter. They remembered your name. They have a beautiful smile. Those 5 facts may all be true, but they do not tell you how that person handles conflict. They do not tell you whether they communicate consistently. They do not tell you whether they want the same kind of relationship you want. They do not tell you whether they keep promises. They do not tell you how you actually feel after spending ordinary, unexciting time together. Yet your mind can quietly borrow qualities from your hopes and place them into those empty spaces. Funny becomes emotionally intelligent. Kind once becomes kind always. A shared song becomes deep compatibility. Chemistry becomes destiny. A good hour becomes evidence for a good future. None of this requires you to be foolish. It only requires incomplete information, plus a mind capable of imagination. And human beings are extremely capable of imagination. Researchers who study romantic love have long described preoccupation, intrusive thinking, and idealization as common cognitive features of intense romantic attraction. There is also a word you may have seen online for an especially intense version of this kind of preoccupation. That word is limerence. It is often used to describe powerful infatuation involving persistent thoughts, idealization, longing, and strong concern about whether the other person reciprocates. But it is useful to be careful with that label. Research specifically focused on limerence is still limited, so thinking about somebody frequently does not mean you should diagnose yourself with anything. A label is less useful than understanding what your particular loop is doing. For one person, the loop may be driven mostly by uncertainty. For another, it may be loneliness. For someone else, this person may represent a version of life they desperately want. Maybe the crush seems adventurous when your life feels repetitive. Maybe they seem confident when you feel stuck. Maybe they appeared at exactly the moment you were questioning whether anybody could still excite you. In that case, you may be thinking about more than them. You may also be thinking about who you imagine yourself becoming around them. That can make the attachment feel surprisingly large. The person is carrying 2 roles at once. They are a real human being, and they are a screen onto which a possible future is being projected. This creates one of the biggest contradictions in the entire loop. Thinking about them feels like getting closer to them, but thinking cannot actually give you much new information about them. You can replay Tuesday's conversation 50 times. There will still be only one Tuesday conversation. You can zoom in on the meaning of one emoji. The emoji will not contain additional data on the 47th inspection. You can imagine what a relationship with them would feel like. But your imagined version will usually cooperate with the story because you are the person writing both characters. Meanwhile, the real person remains mostly unknown, so the loop can create a strange imbalance. The imagined relationship develops faster than the real relationship. Your mind reaches month 6, while reality is still at conversation 3. Then, a tiny real-world event can feel enormous because it is no longer touching one interaction. It is touching an entire invisible future you have already constructed. They do not reply for a day. Reality lost one message. Fantasy suddenly feels as if it might lose a whole relationship. They mention someone else. Reality supplied one new fact. Fantasy experiences it as a threat to a story that had already begun. They act less interested than you expected. And now you are not merely updating your opinion of a person. You may be grieving possibilities that only existed internally. This pattern can appear in surprisingly ordinary places. It can happen with someone you matched with online, but have met only once. It can happen with a coworker you speak to for 10 minutes each morning. It can happen with a person you met while traveling and may never see again. It can happen with a friend of a friend who gave you just enough attention to make you wonder. Social media can add even more fuel because it creates the feeling of continuous access without necessarily creating real closeness. You can know what song they listened to, where they had lunch, and what they wore Saturday night. Yet you may still have no idea how they feel about you. Information increases. Certainty does not. So here is a small experiment you can try the next time one person starts taking up too much space in your head. Do not try to force yourself to stop thinking about them. Instead, separate the real person from the unfinished story. Take a page and make 2 columns. On one side, write what you actually know. Only include things you directly observed, things they clearly told you, or facts you can reasonably verify. On the other side, write what you are filling in. Maybe you know they were warm with you. You may be filling in that they feel a special connection. Maybe you know they viewed your story. You may be filling in that they wanted your attention. Maybe you know you had an unusually good conversation. You may be filling in that the two of you would have an unusually good relationship. Do not criticize yourself for the second column. The point is simply to see how much of the person in your head came from the person and how much came from possibility. Then notice what happens to the urge to replay, check, or fantasize. If you normally visit their profile whenever uncertainty rises, delay that check for a little while, not as punishment, not as a dramatic detox, just long enough to observe the urge before you feed it. Ask what you are hoping the next piece of information will give you. Attention? Reassurance? Proof? A sign that the future you imagined is still possible? That answer may tell you more about the loop than another hour of analyzing their last message. And if a real relationship is possible and contact is appropriate, reality eventually needs the opportunity to replace imagination. That means actual conversations, actual consistency, actual disagreement, actual choices, actual information. Real closeness is built from discovering who another person is when they are no longer mostly blank space. Sometimes the attraction survives that discovery. Sometimes it becomes deeper. Sometimes it becomes quieter and more secure. And sometimes the mystery disappears because the person you imagined and the person you meet are not the same. That outcome can hurt, but it gives your mind something fantasy cannot give it: reality. So the next time their face suddenly appears while you are brushing your teeth, do not immediately ask, "Why can't I stop thinking about this person?" Try a more precise question. What about this person still feels unresolved? Maybe you are longing for them. Maybe you are longing for reciprocation. Maybe you are longing for certainty. Maybe you are longing for the future you started imagining after one very good conversation. Because sometimes the person taking up so much space in your mind is partly a person, and partly an unanswered possibility your mind keeps trying to finish.